We are live now.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I'm Architect Geeta, Chairperson of IIID Coimbatore Center. On behalf of office bearers of IIID Coimbatore Center, I extend a warm welcome to one and all. Today, we are celebrating our 12th Charter Day. At this juncture, I would like to thank our founder chairperson, Architect Rajkumar Davidar, and stalwart of our region, Architect Ramni Shankar, who were instrumental in installing our center. As we celebrate our Charter Day, I take this opportunity to raise questions, discussions to see the profession of design from various perspectives. The design profession is fairly contested today. The tag of specialization had sidelined the idea of integrated approach. How can different tools and methods help us explore the value of design differently? So as a part of the celebration, we would like to host the Design TRYPTIC webinar series to discuss the design through three different modes of practice: architecture, technology, and research. Our team and I are very delighted to begin the first webinar of the series today. We are excited to begin with people and research about Coimbatore. To add life to this, I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Architect Naksha Satish. She is an architect, alumnus of School of Architecture, SET University. She is from the Urban Design program at Harvard Graduate School of Design. She has engaged with several international practices in different ways. She brings along with her integrated approaches to look at the built environment. She enjoys learning through conversations and collective discussions. So I welcome her to moderate the session and introduce our exciting panelists for today. Naksha, you can start.
Thank you, Architect Geeta, for the kind introduction. Good evening to everyone. I hope I'm audible. As a beginner to the Design Triptych series, we would like to host our first session that is themed, What Makes a House? A house is a place that we all associate very differently as we live, play, and design it. And as the tool with which we examine the house changes, we can discover new meanings. The history of design profession in engaging with the idea of the house has been a very long-standing one. However, with the changing technologies and tools, one is still able to uncover new ways of framing this discussion. As a part of the panel today, we have three approaches, as previously mentioned: architecture, technology, and research. The structure of the webinar will be the three presentations one by one, followed by a common discussion panel. Traditionally, the visualization of an architect has been the guiding vision in making of a house. Today, we have with us esteemed architect Siddharth Shankar to share his thoughts of designing houses as he walks us through his projects. This would be followed by a presentation by architect Keshav Narayan about a generative tool that he's developed on principles of housing schemes by Charles Correa. And finally, to provide a tangential perspective, we have exciting researchers from Indian Institute for Human Settlements sharing their findings about rental housing in Coimbatore and Bangalore. We will then have a common discussion, and I request all the viewers to use the comment section below to keep sending in your questions, and we will take up all the questions in the end after all the presentations are done. However, you can keep sending in the questions as and when you like to. As we begin the first presentation for today, I would like to briefly introduce our first speaker, architect Siddharth Shankar. Architect Siddharth is a partner at Shankar and Associates, a very well-established design firm that has a wide range of projects ranging from residential, commercial, and institutional projects. He graduated from Manipal Institute of Technology and then secured a Masters of Architecture from the State University of New York, Buffalo. He brings along with him several years of experience of working in the United States and several other cities in India. As a partner at Shankar and Associates, under his leadership, the firm grew to a strength of 72 and expanded to other cities like Bangalore and Chennai and so on. The firm has won several prestigious awards, including the state commendation for the 26th Architect of the Year Award in 2017. We are very delighted to have you, sir, and take this as a moment to learn from you from your seasoned experiences. May I request you to share your screen and present to us today. So kindly unmute.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, thanks a lot, Naksha, for that kind introduction. The last time somebody introduced me like that was when my parents were trying to get me married to somebody. So thanks for that. So it's a very, very interesting topic and something that's very close to my heart. We are a firm that started with a lot of individual houses and are continued to do a lot of individual, though we've grown into other facets of architecture also, other facets of other building typologies. But we are looking at something that's extremely close to our heart. What makes a house? So one of the most important things, and probably this line about a house is not always a home, but a home is always a house, is a guiding principle that we go by. You take any other kind of building typology. I mean, you take a hospital, you take an institution, you take an industry, you take a commercial building. There is a certain logic associated to it. But the home or the house is something that, and it's a common logic, right? So in a hospital, you have to have an ICU close to an operation theater. In industry, you have to have the carton go down next to the the spinning area. It's all very logical. But in a house, there really, the logic is completely dependent on the individual. It is probably the most emotional building type that one designs. So there is a lot of emotion. There's a lot of passion, a lot of sentiment associated with the house. So it's a building typology that probably brings the best out of an architect. And it is something that most architects sort of build their practice, which is the building blocks to most of their practice, because a good house is something that you're always remembered by. A bad house is also something that you're always remembered by. So with a good house, you start getting referral clients, you start doing more and more work with the same people. And the best form of marketing is referral. I'm sure all of you would sort of agree. And in a bad house, you kind of get the negative publicity that you ought not to get. So it is probably the most emotional building type, as I keep repeating, and it is also the most complex, because you are designing somebody's lifestyle. I mean, you first have to understand lifestyle, you have to understand it, and lifestyles are not something that you can understand very easily. It's something that you have to sort of, focus on and listen and hear, because here is a man that is bringing his entire lifestyle, and you are sort of working with him for 2 years. You need to understand his lifestyle and, sort of bring his dreams to life with his money and your architectural ideas too. So it's a complex sort of a relationship. In no other profession are you allowed to realize your money with somebody else's dream. So there's a great responsibility when it comes to designing homes. So when a client comes to architects, and you can sort of look at this Venn diagram, he comes with his concern, he comes with his needs, he comes with his ideals, his dreams, his ideals, and then he also comes with, these are the three sort of very non-tangible ideas, and then you sort of get into the more tangible things, which is the program. How many bedrooms? Do you want a large kitchen? Do you want a small kitchen? Do you want a kitchen that you're going to cook in? You're going to have a kitchen and a cook is going to cook in. Then there is context. Context is probably the most important thing, because what surrounds it, and especially with today's dense urban environments, you have to be super aware of the context. The third and probably the most important thing, and that's something that something very difficult to regulate in a house, is cost. It's like getting married, right? I mean, you start with a budget for a marriage, and then it goes for a complete toss. More often than not, I think houses also become that. But then that's a very important thing to do as a professional, and understand what are the budget cost requirements. And probably the fourth and more extremely important thing, especially in today's context, for that matter, should have been every time, is the climate around, the microclimate, the macroclimate of the site, wind direction, light, all these things. One of the things that I tell most of the younger architects in my practice is just do two things when you meet a client: see, listen, then talk. Normally, when a client or a person, when he comes to an architect, it's very different than if he goes to any other professionals. You go to an auditor, or you go to a lawyer, or you go to a doctor. More often than not, when you are in trouble, you come to an architect because you are successful, right? And you want something built. So the guy that sits opposite your seat is always the guy who's smarter than you. I mean, he's able to spend the 2 or 3 crores on a house, which you probably are unable to do. So it's very, very important to listen to them. Not only do you understand his lifestyle, you understand, you also look at them. You see how they dress, how they talk, what the body language is, and all that becomes extremely important in sort of deducing what your client may want. And once you start doing that, and with experience, it's amazing how quickly you can arrive at a plan or a scheme that the client likes right up front. Okay, he comes to you because of your expertise, right? And it's very important for you to have the knowledge. But more than the knowledge, it's very, very important that one needs to understand the client. Client interactions brings a lot of things on the table. One is, you'll have to bring in material preferences. Somebody will come and say, sir, I want my house to look like, the Vidhan Sauda. Or somebody will come and say, I want my house to look like one of those Norwegian, Scandinavian types. So everybody comes with their ideas and passions. More often than not, a person builds only one house in his lifetime. You probably will get married more than you build a house. So, it's important that all those aspirations be met. Local bylaws, sensibilities, areas to convey a message or a feeling. What is around you? Transitional spaces, outdoor spaces, colors, resource consciousness, experiences. All these, things start popping up when you start looking at a house. And the more you get experience, the more you're able to sort of do this quicker and quicker and better and better. Let me, sort of divide this into a pragmatic, division of how the process of house design goes. First, of course, and probably the most paramount thing, is the client brief. Besides just the, requirement, their aspirations, their family style, the family size, who's going to come and live with them? Are they a joint family? Are they a nuclear family? And it varies from city to city, region to region, country to country, person to person. So, this is something that one has to pay strong heed to. Site, climate, and context, probably the most important thing. And then I think for any building typology, I think I'm preaching to the choir, but, site analysis. Understand your site perfectly. It will always give you clues. This is a mantra that, we've gone about for the last 50 years in our firm, and we've achieved moderate success doing that. Space planning. Budget is something that drives space planning. Today, Vastu, whether you like it or not, whether you believe in it or don't believe in it, the Vastu guy or the Vastu becomes a very, very important part of the house. More often than not, I encourage the client just to get the ideas from the Vastu guy and come to us, and don't bring the Vastu guy to meet us. So That's one thing out of your head. Form and function, which is what the architect sort of derives. Materiality, the architectural style, or what you're thinking about, and what is it that you want to bring to the plate as a building, because the architect's dreams are also a part of the house. So it's very, very important that sort of get that out too. So materiality, facade, form. Another thing is structural design. Columns, beams, and slabs are something that you can't do away with. You need to acknowledge that they are there, and you need to sort of understand them, and then sort of mold them to the way you want it best suited to the design that you've done. So it's very, very important that one needs to understand that. Then interior design is a big thing these days. Concepts, colors. Everybody has Pinterest. Everybody has Google. They actually come to you with an interior design and ask you to execute it. But it's up to you to sort of maneuver through all those ideas and get something sensible as well as something that fulfills their aspirations. Colors, concepts, material palettes, services. Toilets, services, and toilets. Very, very important in a house. Most houses today are automated. There's air conditioning, there's sophisticated lighting systems that one has to take in, and all these need to be integrated. And that is where you, as the master of construction, you as an expert, will have to sort of take it into consideration. Another very important thing today is both landscape, both planned, which is existing, with unplanned, which is existing on the site, part of the context. And planned landscape is very, very important. More often than not, people come and put an olive tree in Coimbatore and it never grows, right? So it is very, very important for you to understand appropriate landscaping. Things like soil loads, if you have roof gardens, pools and all that, you have to take into consideration. And drip irrigation, waterproofing, all those things are very, very important. These are basic building blocks. Now, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to talk you through three very different kind of houses. One is a very, very tight urban house. The second is a retreat home. And the third is a house with a place of business or a place of activity. So let me walk you through all these three things. How much time do I have, Naksha?
So you have 10 minutes more.
Okay, let me rush through them.
Yeah.
So this is a house that we've done in Coimbatore. It's an absolute urban home. If you look at the site, it is a 5.5 cent size. It's about 45 feet by 55 feet. And, it's also a corner plot. So there is also a cornering where we lose about 5 feet. And, the client wanted close to it's about 2,684 square feet. And the client wanted about, 5,000 square feet of space. So, we had to do a block. And, the client had very, very strict Vastu guidelines and things like that, which we had to follow. So we had to absolutely do the block. And there were two very important things. One was to satisfy all his requirements. He wanted 4 fully furnished bedrooms, en-suite bedrooms, besides other things. The second thing is, how do you make this block interesting? How do you make it look? Most clients come to you and say, sir, I want the house to be cheap and best. Only in India, cheap and best works. Cheap cannot be best, best cannot cheap, best cannot be cheap. You need to sort of work through all these things. So the first thing we started looking at it was the site. And we said, this northeast corner was the most interesting thing, and let's start doing something with that. And that's where we started. It's a simple plan. One enters through, luckily we have a corner road, so we have an entry, car drop off and everything. And what we've done is, we've created a lift. It's a 3-storied house is what we've planned. We've done all the public spaces in the ground floor, the drawing, family, dining, kitchen, and all those things in the ground floor. And we've taken all the bedrooms from the first floor onwards. One of the things, and this is a continuing, it's a recurring concept that we do in most of our projects, is there are 2 ways you can always do house. Landscape or a little bit of garden or a little bit of nature in your house is extremely important to us, because they bring in most light and natural vegetation. That to us is very important. So you can design house 2 ways. One is you can design house with a garden, which is a house with a big garden in the front and all that. Or you can do a house in a garden where you sort of deconstruct, you bring small garden spaces throughout the house, and you start, bringing in garden to where the occupants of the house is. And to me, that seems to be a much better urban model. So what we started doing is we started carving out these little garden spaces on every level. So if you look at it, that was on the ground floor, there's a garden level. On the first floor, there's a garden. And on the first floor, there is actually a lounge and 2 bedrooms. On the second floor, there is again a garden. So every room overlooks something of value. And that's very, very important to us in every, sort of concept that we do. So like I said, we started burrowing out the corners and we started making a very, very interesting corner of the house. And we sort of tied a parasol around it to, sort of do the Vastu constraints and make it a rectangular, regular form. Let me go to the photographs. So it's a 3-storied house, like I said. And another thing that we sort of did was, and I'll show it you better in the photograph, is one of the things that most urban houses, have to deal with are grills, for safety grills. And we sort of started eliminating these grills by introducing pergolas, which sort of tied onto the compound walls and created gardens within them. And thereby we eliminated grills on all the windows. I'll show you more pictures of it. You'll get more clarity. That was the first, sort of 3D model we generated. The materiality completely changed as we went along the product. That's another thing with building, especially with the housing typology. It's a project, it's a product that's always in flux, and you have to be ready to embrace the change. Like I said, this is the 3-leveled house. This is the side garden. We've got 2-leveled gardens on one above the other, and one overlooks the other. And we've got a lot of overlook spaces in the house. We did, sort of interior renderings. The client wanted wood and, beige color. He wanted a very soft look to the whole thing. And that's kind of what we went with. And why not? It came out pretty well too. So that is what the house looks like. This is the 2 roads on either side, and that's the corner. And we thought that display actually gave us more advantages in creating the mass than, sort of disadvantages, any impediment that it does. These are the various level terraces, and we create this huge cantilevered parasol on top. And the nice thing, the most gratifying thing in this house is when you go there and see people actually enjoy your concepts. Materiality, was very, very simple. Stone, little bit of wood, white color, and some steel pergolas and all that around. That's the large canopy, cantilevered canopy. That's how the house looks like on the inside. The house is filled with natural light, and that's something that we sort of love to do. This is the shot of the living room. This is the side garden. You sort of get out of the family room, and you sort of get out of the side garden, and you can see the pergolas on the top. That spans the building to the compound wall. Thereby, we've eliminated all the grills in this area. So when you open it out, it's a completely open space, and they even leave it open in the night. And because of the pergolas, there's sort of a tunnel effect. That gets invoked. The whole house is filled with natural ventilation. This is the detail that I'm talking about. These are the pergolas on the top. This is the boundary wall. We've done some nice stone work there. And this is a space that the family hangs out all the time. This is a shot of some of the interior shots. The shot of the dining room. We also played with some nice soft detailing, some artistic detailing. We did the little glass cut work and created a puja door. The puja rooms are created according to the client's wishes, and we started bringing in some soft lighting just to make it look a little ethereal. This is a lounge on the first floor. Both the first and the second floor have lounges, and then sort of they open into bedrooms on each floor, and you can see the lift here. So it's a really, really tiny footprint which we've sort of worked with. These are shots of the bedrooms. Shot of the bathrooms. Well, all the bathrooms are 8x8 or 10x8. So we've managed to do a reasonably good sized bathroom on the small site. Shot of the home theater. And these are the terraces. They're yet to be landscaped. We're still working on the landscape of the house even now. So, with this Corona thing, all that, and budgets have also gone for a toss. So hopefully we should get the landscape done. But this is the view of the city from here. It's an absolutely beautiful view at night. Let me go to the next thing, which is a retreat home. Here we had a large site, but we had a challenging site because it was a heavily sloped site. It also helped that it was a house for a friend, so we could experiment, on a few things in the house. The site, I don't know if you can read the contours very clearly, but let me tell you, there is about a 14-meter slope from one end of the site, this being the road being the highest level, and the other side being an absolute drop-down valley. It's a 14-meter slope on the other side. So there's a huge slope. So what we did was we started working on the house in 3 levels. The first level was, you sort of came down from the road into the house level. We pushed the house back by about 25 to 30 feet. And we created a car park, and we brought in all the sort of public and the common area, and every level had a deck. I'll show you a view of the valley. It's drop dead gorgeous. The living, dining, the kitchen, and all that is in level 1. And there is this pink space is the deck, and you can see the other levels below. Level 2 has the bedrooms. Unfortunately, because of Vastu, the master bedroom is in the southwest corner, and that's the only bedroom that doesn't have a deck. So sometimes, Vastu comes and kicks you in the back, and you can't do anything about it. But the other bedrooms have gorgeous views looking outside. And, there is also a private deck in between. And the third level is sort of the entertainment level. We wanted the third level to be the entertainment level because they wanted the access from outside. So what we've done a bar and a heated pool in the cool climate of Kunur. We've done a heated pool. So that's and I'll show you pictures of it. It's a very, very unpretentious looking house in the front. This is all you see from the front, but the house unravels itself as you go down the slope. You can see the level difference of the house. This is about 14 meters all the way down. So 40 feet down. You can see the house. It's almost 3 to 4 levels. There's 3 levels of the house. There's an upper level of garden and a lower level of garden. That is the initial sort of Revit modeling of the house. Something that we use quite a bit of Revit modeling to help us sort of work through difficult forms and difficult contours. You can see the steepness of slope in this. And these are some of the interior concepts that we started generating. We started working on interior perspectives. We do pretty detailed perspectives for us to understand and communicate to the client. So these are some interior perspectives we started working on. We wanted a very rustic sort of a house. That's what we started working on. And this is a bar area. So this is kind of how the house, that's the entrance. The guy is a big Game of Thrones fan, so hence it's called Jay's Winterfell. That is what it looks like from the front, but you can see the valley behind. It's like a literally endless valley behind. This is another shot of the house from the front, and you can see it dipping down to various levels. Another thing that we wanted to see was the sky here is absolutely pristine, because there is absolutely no lights around for quite a bit of at least for about a kilometer there are no lights. So in the night you can actually sit in your living room and see the sky, or in the daytime you can see, and it's clear, it's full of stars, and you can see the moon on a full moon day is absolutely gorgeous. You can see the level difference between the front, coming down into the house. So that is the level difference, and that is the valley, and you actually see the clouds right up to your eye level when you stand up on the house. These are the decks at the uppermost level. Nice seating areas. And that is the view from the first deck. There's also a nice little waterfall right nestled in the mountain. On a clear day, you can see that. This is how the interiors turned out. Simple stone, wood, colorful furniture, clutter-free kind of a thing. And most of the furniture, especially the middle table and the dining tables, were also designed and executed on wood found there. So we designed all the furniture too, excluding the sofas and the chairs. This was a 3.5 inch, 4 inch thick wood plank that we found on the site. So we sort of saved it and used it for the dining table. And like I said, these are the windows on the top where you can actually see out at night when you're sitting inside the living and the dining space. You go down to the next level, and there's a lounge. We come out, there's a beautiful little place for a swing and a valley view, and the sun plays lovely tricks. And these are the steps that you come down, right? The shots of the bedroom. This is the master bedroom. This is the one without a view of the valley. So what we did was we gave him a nice bathroom with an outdoor shower. So some consolation for him. These are the other bedrooms. Gorgeous views of the valley, standout decks. You can stand out and you can absolutely see the valley. That's the view that you get. And then you come into the the fun part, the pool and the bar. That's the pool deck at night. And this is the bar. And these are the bedrooms on top. That's the view from the pool. And on a nice day, this is what you see. It's absolutely like an endless valley. It's an endless pool. You see the clouds, taking a dip in your pool. This is a shot of the bar. And this is the lowest level. This is where the fire pit and all that is there. A shot from the lowest level. And that is the valley. That's the absolute end of the valley. When we actually went to build the site, every time we went, we saw either a buffalo, we saw a bison or a leopard. So it was very, very interesting, adventurous site. The third thing I'm going to talk about is a house. She's a dancer. So what we did was we designed a house about 6 years ago. And then about a year and a half ago, we designed her dance studio to sort of integrate it. So this is a house with a workspace. I'm sorry, I have a problem with the plan. It sort of slightly got corrupted. It's about a 20-cent size site. This is the house and this is the dance studio. And we've got two completely separate entrances for both of them, but it's linked through the garden so that the lady can come in from the garden and get into a dance studio to teach. We follow similar principles as far as any urban house. We try to bring in as much natural light and ventilation and as much garden space as possible. So what we've done is we've done this large outdoor courtyard around which this entire house is planned. And then we've sort of linked the courtyard to the dance studio. And the house is an exploration of materiality, color, tradition, and all that, because that's what the dancer wanted. All the public spaces, the living room and the dining room and all that is in the front. And then we've got a couple of bedrooms on the ground floor and a couple of more in the first floor. I'm not getting into too much detailing of the plan for the want of time. It's a very unpretentious looking house. This is the facade of the house. All you see is a little bit of plastered surface with some stones, interspersed between plastered surface. The shot from the other side, large garden in the front. And that's sort of how you approach the house. Below a set of pergolas with a little bit of a garden, and you sort of enter the house from here. This is the entrance into the dance studio, and the house and the dance studio is integrated, and there is a connection between these two walls. There is a link from here through which you can come into this house, into the dance studio. These are some interior shots of the house, just to give you the kind of feel in the house. It's like a semi-contemporary kind of a feel. The one thing that I'll ask you to observe is the amount of windows, amount of light and ventilation. Most of the shots are taken during daytime, so it's pretty bright in the house most of the time. These are the walkways. Simple. We've used some marble, we've used some wood, and we've left plain, unpretentious walls. And she's filled it with art. I think art, personal effects is what makes a house a home. I mean, and those are the things that sort of graduates it from a house to a home. And this is the courtyard around which the whole house is planned. And every room literally looks into this courtyard. And we've done the same principles of having a pergola on the top. We brought it to the compound wall. This is the wall that that's in between the dance studio and the house, and you open a door and you go into the dance studio completely. So this is a lovely hangout space. And it sort of blurs the boundaries between the interior and the exterior completely. I mean, there's the interior space and the exterior space, and there's almost a seamless connect between the two. That's how it looks like in the evenings. These are some of the bedrooms, unpretentious, simple. We've used some colors. This is the kids' bedroom, and it's a vaulted thing, so we sort of use the vault, as part of the design. And like I said, everything opens out into the garden. We've also got a garden in the first floor, but everything opens out into this courtyard. You can look into this courtyard from literally every room. Let me go into the dance class, into something that was done later. There are two approaches, one from the main part of the house and another from the road, so students can come in from there. Nice stoned pathway, and it's a simple rectangular thing because she didn't want any funky shapes, because they wanted to do their formations, their productions and all that in a simple space. And one of the things that we sort of did here was we had to bring in Nataraja, because he's the guy that watches over the whole dance, and it had to be kept in a particular way. So we've done that. And another thing that we've done is we've opened it out into a garden. So daytime, during breaks, people can go out and sit out in the garden for a little bit. And it also fills the studio with a lot of natural ventilation. On the first floor of the dance floor, we've done a small, dress change room, production, and all that is done there. And one thing that we've done with the Nataraja statue is we've given it a light. So we've given it a skylight, and at exactly 12 o'clock, summer solstice, it's literally filled with a ray of light, inspired by Tadao Ando, but then we wanted to have the shaft of light falling on Nataraja. One of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to blend a lot of traditional elements along with a very modern construction. So that's kind of how we sort of enter. There is a Deepa Stambham, which welcomes everybody in, and we've done a beautiful. This is about a 150-year-old door that we got, and we had it painted by a mural artist. And we also had a very, very stiff budget to work with. So all these tiles are actually sample tiles from a tile showroom, which we took and we used it for the ceiling. That's the shot of the Deepa Stambham. That is the tiles from the sample tiles that we used on the ceiling. Brought a little element of color to the whole thing. So this is the interior space. This is the Nataraja where the shaft of light comes from the top, and we got this mural painted by this group called Bhavanam, which is the largest mural that he's painted. It's about 12 feet by 40 feet, and this is completely hand painted in the studio. And we've got a small little research corner where she puts all her books, does all her laptop, and this is also the audio segment. All the audio instrument is there, recording instrument is there. It can be pulled out at any time, and they can work. Another thing is the flooring is a specialized flooring, because there are two things. One is we didn't want the knees of the dancers to be affected. The second and more important thing is dancers, especially in formation, communicate by the tapping of the feet. So we didn't want a very silent floor as well. So they would tap, and the dancers behind you would listen to the tap and follow course. That's kind of how patterns in dance work. It was a very important learning for us. What we've done is we've completely cantilevered the corner, and we've brought in a lot of light through it, and completely unadorned, simple ceiling. This is an area where we've kept all the awards and everything of the dancer. She's a Kalaimamani awardee, so we wanted to bring in all her awards. And this is the garden that I was talking to you about.
So sorry to interrupt. You have about like a minute to conclude.
I'm done.
Sorry.
So that's one of the dance formations. That's how they train, and we've got a projector. It's completely equipped. That is her. She's the client. And we also needed a mirror, because these guys have to look in, and we brought in a certain amount of acoustics into the whole thing. These are the shots of the Nataraja during the day. This is exactly at 12 o'clock. And these are at various different times of the day. And shots from the top of this thing, and some artistic shots of the studio. And this door also is a hand-painted door, completely hand-painted door. And that is the landscape corner. It's a completely cantilevered corner. And this is a performance. They also have, small recitals there. So this is the performance in progress. Thank you. So different homes have different needs, and you need to sort of address each need separately, understand it, identify it, and then hopefully you can pull off something that the client likes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for sharing wonderful snippets from different projects of yours. I request the listeners to share their questions in the comments section. We'll move ahead to the next speaker. Our second speaker for today is architect Keshav Narayan, a recent graduate from School of Architecture, CEPT University. His interest lies in the intersection of architecture and technology. And through a semester-long experience at the TU Munich in Germany, his interest for generative design has triggered. And since then, he's built on in this direction to explore innovatively on how can we use the traditional designs in creative manners. I invite Keshav to share with us his ingenious ideas on creatively learning from traditional master architects like Charles Correa. Welcome, Keshav.
Hi.
You can go ahead and share the screen.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you're able to hear me. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So good evening, everyone. So tonight I'm looking at a house through the lens of technology. So if we talk about technology generally in architecture, it generally just relates to producing funky forms in general. And the computer as a design tool usually just comes later in the design process, once the design is done. So I was obsessed with this idea that technology should play an active role in the design process and not just as form optimizers. So so I was obsessed with this question: how can technology inform how can technology inform the traditional design methods and in turn inform the design of a house? So I asked a few questions at the start of my research. So can the design decisions we take as architects be more informed than just our instincts? How can we push technology's limits beyond visualizing our intuitive design strategies? Uh, how can how can the traditional be reinterpreted through technology? So, so as I said earlier, why is it important to understand housing through technology? I mean, as Siddharth sir said, like house is the most complex thing that an architect can design. So, and it's also the most predominant form of construction in India that is almost neglected. That we, yeah. So, and usually in large scale housing projects, the scope and scale of the project is very large and it requires numerous design decisions that go together with each other. And these considerations can be processed as information in a computational process. And computers are well equipped to process a large amount of information better than humans. So, and it is also possible to unearth new patterns and relationships that cannot be seen in a traditional process because the medium of analysis is just different. So, as we see in architecture generally, all good designs have a recurring set of patterns in them. So, my intent through this research was to just unearth these successful housing patterns in habitats in India through technology. So, as Naksha said, my case study um, for this for this research was Charles Correa's housing projects. So I took his projects and fed them into a computational analysis which analyzes the existing housing units of Charles Correa, and also these set of observations in turn inform the set of generations that are created as a result of this analysis. So I took 7 case studies of Charles Correa, which are all of these projects are low-rise, high-density housing projects done by him. So there are 17 units that I have analyzed as a result of this thesis. So first, I abstracted the functional spaces from the spaces in terms of functions in the units, and then I fed them into the generative system. So here, I'm just running a short video of how the generative system, of the analysis of how the generative system works. So the plan, so the spaces are just abstracted in terms of squares and dot lines. And once I feed this into the generative system, it gives the percentage of area, and it also gives the depth map. So the depth map refers to the number of doors that that one has to pass through in order to reach the space. So this is how the generative system analyzes. The generative system done by me analyzes the house plan. So it just yeah, and so this is a screenshot of the result that is generated as a result of the code that you can see in the right. So it displays the percentage of area that each space occupies, the depth map, and the percentage. So as a result of this, so there are 6 criteria that I analyzed using the code. So the first one is unit types. So where I just analyze the location of different spaces and the shape of proportion of each space with respect to each other. The second one is the module, where I looked at the module as a whole with respect to the unit, and then I calculated the ratio of open to closed space in a unit, the interrelationship of functions with respect to the unit, and the overall generation pattern of how the units function with each other. So this is the flow chart that this is the chart that I came up with after analyzing these units. So the general observations that I had after doing these case studies, I have classified them into three types. So one is profile or geometry oriented. So one thing that I observed that in Korea's housing projects, where the unit size was generally 1:1 or 3:1, the proportion of the area occupied. So the square is usually inspired from the Vastupurusha mandala, which is generally there which is used in hot and humid climates like Mumbai. Whereas he developed a module which is called the tube house, which is used in hot and dry climates. And if the unit is a square, then it follows a cluster generation. If the unit is linear, it follows a chain-like generation. And in Korea's works, you can see the importance of the courtyard that is generally there in his projects, and it's very evidently seen. And the ratio of mass to void in his projects are generally 1:1, 1.5:1. And the program-oriented units the conclusions are, so the entrance is always through a courtyard or an open space. So if there is two open space, it is usually through the smaller open space. And generally there is no there is no corridor or circulation space as such in his units, because it increases the construction cost of the units. So and the typical space allocation of each unit is as shown here. So after doing this analysis, I created a workflow of how this generative system should work. So first, the generative system allocates the space for the unit to occupy the space, and then it multiplies. So this is some of the iterations that was generated as a result of the Grasshopper code. I'm playing them. So these were the kind of outputs that I got as a result of this analysis. And so these were the kind of unit plans that were generated as a result of this analysis by Grasshopper. And these are some of the iterations. So these are some of the existing housing project plans done by Korea. I'm just showing these to showing these just to show how these the iterations generated in the next few slides are starkly similar to these projects. So this is one of the results that I had obtained, and here you can see that that it has considered the open space and has designed the unit accordingly. And the scale of the open space that is generated in between is similar in scale to the image that is shown on the right. So here, this was a strange coincidence that happened. So the Grasshopper system generated a unit that was exactly similar to one that was generated by that was designed by Korea in one of his housing projects. So this was one of the observations that was there. And like this, I had collected many observations as a result of this analysis. So here I have just compiled the units that have been largely similar to what Korea has designed. Like for example, this one that is shown in a rectangle is similar to the Prairie housing, and this one is similar to ACC housing, like one of the projects that I had shown earlier. So the conclusions as a result of this is that I feel that the design process does not just end with choosing one of the designs that is generated as a result of this. the trade-offs that are generated earlier have to be analyzed, and the design decisions will have to be considered alongly. And aspects and understanding traditional designs to technology can be a way in which the technology can start tapping into the intangible aspects of design process, which is what I feel is often criticized about technology as yeah. So hence, algorithms can not be only used as a process of design, but they should also be used in order to analyze the critically analyze the design decisions themselves, and not just stand as form optimizers as they stand in the world today. So yes. So thank you so much for listening, and yeah. I mean, I think, yeah.
Okay. Could you stop the screen share? Yeah. Thank you, Keshav, for sharing those innovative ways in which we can bring and bridge the gap between traditional and the new technological processes, and uh, broaden the horizon in which we can use new tools and processes. Our final set of panelists for today are exciting urban practitioners from Indian Institute for Human Settlements. Vinita is an associate in practice who works on the subjects around risk and resilience and affordable housing. She received her master's in building and urban design and development from DPU London. Her research work has received recognition in several national and international platforms. Joining her, we have Nihal Ranjit, who holds a master's degree in public policy and governance from TIS and currently an external consultant at IIHS. He also works on risk, resilience, and allied concepts. And lastly, I was lucky enough to be a part of this research team when I was associated with IIHS during my urban fellowship program in 2018. We're really excited to present to you our research journey. Okay, once again, good evening to all of you. What makes a house? And I think we've heard already two sort of perspectives of architecture and technology. And we would like to introduce research perspectives on rental housing in Coimbatore and Bangalore. So when we walk around the cities of the when we walk around the cities, we see that several houses are being made and we don't know why they are the way they are. We see some new construction happening, but there's no staircase to this house. And then on the other side, we see that there are old houses which get in new staircases. On the other hand, we see a lot of houses here which make impromptu additions. And on the other side, there are a lot of shoes and a lot of people trying to get into one house. What makes these houses? What is happening in our cities? So our project, Low Income Rental Housing, Typologies and Supply, is a part of the larger TURN project on rental housing that tries to record, document, and analyze these occurrences in the city. The rental housing project is a part of the larger Tacit Urban Research Network, and I would like to credit the entire research team and our mentors and collaborators who have joined us at various moments of the entire journey, and we'd like to present a part of it. Through the rental housing research, we would like to discuss the external social and economic considerations of the individual homeowners who provide the supply of these rental houses incrementally in the absence of a formal designer. So as opposed to the last two presentations, we would like to talk about the house in the absence of the designer itself. What factors influence the landlord renting behavior? What are the types and forms of rental housing that's being produced in the city? This study argues that the understanding of the renting behavior of the homeowners is very essential to understand the types and production of rental housing itself. Vinita?
Hi. Yeah, hi. I'm Vinita, and what I'm going to do over the next couple of minutes is to set the context in which our study has been framed. Please do let me know if I'm not audible or if you lose me at any point. Next slide, Naksha. So now India is a rapidly urbanizing country, right? We've heard this many times. More than 40% of India's population is estimated to live in urban areas by 2030. What does this sentence even mean? It means that our cities, which are already crowded and struggling for uniform access to basic services, will have to now accommodate an additional 40% of the population. Essentially, this is what the affordable housing shortage or the affordable housing crisis is in India. And this is essentially from where our project even took place and from where we got the idea for this project. Since this is 2020, we are already seeing a lot of this crisis unfolding today with rising numbers of homelessness and informal squatting that we see in cities. So I'll just take a couple of minutes to unpack this, and then I will hand over to my colleagues to talk about our research in more in depth. So next slide. The affordable housing crisis in India is unfortunately defined as a numerical problem. So what does this mean? This means that there is an X number of shortage that is defined, and then we build an X number of houses to fill the gap. Now, the irony is that we are not building it in the section that actually needs it. So about 98% of this shortage is actually in LIG. I got it. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. There is rain here and I lost internet, but now I'm back. Yeah, sorry. So I was saying that this means that there is an X number of shortage and we're building an X number of houses, and we're not actually building it in the section that actually needs it. So because 98% of this shortage is actually in LIG and EWS section, but we have proliferated and like extensively built in an abundance in stock in MIG and HIG housing, which is already there, and that's not really an area that we actually needed. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. So the other problem that we have is that we always, both in policy and practice, have pushed for ownership of houses. Now, this is a fair bargain. Owning a house provides good financial stability. You could get access to more capital by using it as collateral. There are many benefits. However, going back to our urbanization argument, India is urbanizing, yes, but it is pocketed. This means that there are some pockets in the country that are industrial centers, employment centers that generate jobs and livelihoods as compared to other parts of the country. This means that a majority of India's workforce is actually moving, is mobile across cities, across districts. And these migrants or workforce that is moving across the country are going to be settling in places that are actually generating these jobs. So it means 40% of that, the percentage that we had talked about before, of these people who are actually concentrated in economic centers, these are areas that are going to require more amount of infrastructure on our side to understand how we're going to house them. So when we think about this, ownership of house is useful, but it's not really a solution. We need multiple tenure options to address these issues. So people can get access to housing in cities without necessarily having to own a house, which is also a huge sort of financial investment. Now we've put, however, our policies actually don't address this. We don't have a national rental housing policy or any policies or programs in the country like RAY, PMAY. None of them really address multiple housing tenures. We've always pushed for ownership of house and we've stuck to it. There's a rental housing policy in the draft, but I don't think it's still like out there. So now we've put this map of India that shows a proportion of rental housing, the proportion of rental housing distributed across India. Now, if we don't have policies in place and if the state is not building any rental housing, where is all this rental housing then coming from? The answer is that the people themselves are the largest producers and consumers of rental housing, and it is largely informal and heavily unregulated. Next slide. So in Bangalore and Coimbatore alone, where our study is actually located, due to them being economic centers, have more than 50% of housing which is rented. Next slide. So when we think of affordable housing, we see broadly these three kinds of housing. So there is state provided, there is contractor driven, and then there is land rent type housing. When there are no houses, so if there are no houses or if the supply is not enough, that's what people do. So they go to a piece of land and they build their own houses and pay a certain amount of money as rent for them to be squatting there. Unfortunately, next slide. Unfortunately, what we see is that the third kind of scenario is the most that we see in terms of informal slums, or like people squatting in areas that is government or privately owned land and paying, like sort of very unregulated scenarios that we keep seeing. And this is primarily because our supply is not matching with our demand. So we are not constructing adequately and fast enough for people who actually need it. Next slide. So we have this skewed demand and supply ratio, and not only are we building houses for this section that needs it the most, we are also not building them fast enough, essentially. So the next slide, sorry. So now we know that we need multiple tenure housing because not everybody can afford to own a house. And because people are more mobile, you need different sort of housing options. We need to rethink the way that we provide houses to people. So our question was then to understand what are the forms that are already existing and how can we facilitate and strengthen them. So now we say strengthen and not provide rental housing, because our research shows that due to complexity and largely informal nature of rental housing, it is almost impossible for the state to provide adequate rental housing. It can, however, facilitate through policy and subsidies. But for that, there is a need to research and understand who are the people who are actually producing these kind of rental housing, what is driving the form of rental housing, is it adequate, are the living conditions good enough, or how do we sort of strengthen this informal or like sort of homegrown practices of providing houses, and how do we scale it up in a way that it actually bridges the affordable housing gap. So I'll now pass on to my colleagues who are going to talk about actually next slide. Yeah. So essentially we've studied this in two cities, Bangalore and Coimbatore, as Naksha had spoke about earlier. And essentially we picked these two areas because they have an industrial history and have a conducive rental market. So areas that are industrial or generate jobs, and therefore more number of people come and stay there. And therefore those areas will require rental housing because most of these people would be migrants. So we chose an established and emerging rental market to study. So Bangalore is the established market, which is located in the city center. It was once a periphery, but now it's very much in the city. That's Yeshwanthpur and Pina area. And we've explored rental housing stories in these areas. And in Coimbatore, although it does have a very established industrial core, we chose to study peripheries because we saw a very interesting sort of phenomenon coming out there where there are new kind of typologies and new kind of rental housing patterns that are emerging because a new demand has been formed there. So we thought it would be great to sort of complement these two studies, and that's broadly where our research is placed. Next slide. So our methods were broadly semi-structured interviews that gave us detailed and dense notes on housing stories, and that helped us analyze how these homes are produced. So now I'll hand over to my colleagues to discuss our findings next.
So the first few set of findings we would like to share through the stories that we encountered. And as Vinita was mentioning, the entire or the major chunk of the supply is based on the individual homeowners. So the individual homeowners are almost the only suppliers of rental housing. And given the absence of formal actors, a large segment of the housing is provided at unsubsidized private and informal ways. So the first set of stories was this house in Pina in the industrial area in Bangalore. And this house is an example because this house sort of shifted its ownership as it grew in time. So it was a single property initially owned by a family, and eventually the family fragmented and the site was also divided. However, the common staircase, which is in the center, continued to exist. One half was sold off to a new person, and that person rented it again. And then there existed two owners at the same time. And at a later stage, what happened? The owner of this part became the tenant on the top portion of the other one. So this is a very typical example where there is no stark difference between who is the owner, who's the tenant, and so on, and multiple realities and complexities exist at the same time. The second sort of feature of rental housing is the idea that it is highly born out of economic and social considerations of the homeowners that are producing and creating this supply. So this story is from a house in Yashwantpur, which is a growing post-industrial zone, which is very close to the transportation hub. So in this scenario, Mrs. Sarojamma owned this house initially. And then as she went through financial this house will show us an example of how her financial considerations and transformation led to the bricolage nature of this house. And you can see like how very impromptu and the staircases are randomly added. And we were just trying to understand what was the reason behind this and what was the sequence in which this was born. So through chit funds, she managed to build one floor with her neighbors. And then she took a bank loan and she added another floor. And she was then an owner of 8 houses. But very soon, due to mismanagement of finances, she became poor and couldn't pay back the money that she had taken as a loan. So as a temporary owner, there emerged, and she sub-rented the property to someone else. Those 4 properties was then further sub-rented by the new emerging owner. A small house here on top is then gifted to her newly married daughter as dowry. Thus, in a sense, this building now represents the tensions within and around the relations between owners and different financial institutions, a tension that sort of accommodates diversity, but also allows for such a form of housing to negotiate with the city.
So I'll just quickly run through the next major finding that we had from both the cities. So one other feature that we came across was that in both the cities, there was, like Naksha had said before, there was an absence of a formal designer. So in most cases, the rental units emerged on the basis of the situational constraints and the local knowledge and trends of the neighborhood. So next slide. So if you look at this particular case, the homeowner, he was a migrant to Coimbatore who had migrated in the early 90s, and he was working in one of the manufacturing units that made jigs and fixtures. And over the decades, he saved enough to procure this particular piece of land, and then he himself designed this building. So if you look closely, the ground floor of the building is a manufacturing unit that houses a small scale industry that makes small parts for larger industries. And the first floor, it houses his house where his family stays. And then there are 2 rental units on the side here. And the top floor again has a worker quarter. So this rental unit for the rental units that came up as an impromptu decision. So like what Mr. Siddharth was saying earlier, that a house is largely driven by the logic of an individual. So in the same case here also, the reason why this person chose to build rental units was, again, this particular area was located on the outskirts of the city, and the neighborhood had largely similar small-scale manufacturing industries. So when he chose to bring his family over and make a house here, he realized that they don't have any sort of a feeling of presence of neighbors around. So, and once the construction was building was nearing completion, he added these 2 rental units so that they would have a sense of security that is offered by the tenants. Similarly, the idea of the decision to add a workers' quarters was taken because that also in a way ensured that there would be a surety of labor to work in his manufacturing units. So, and then since it was designed by himself, so when we were talking to him, when we were interviewing him, he was saying that he's aware that he had made a couple of design flaws. And then in retrospect, he was saying that if he had known these things before, he could have substantially saved a lot of costs. So a similar case that we saw in the outskirts of Coimbatore, Naksha, next slide, is located near the Chill SEZ in Coimbatore. So here again, this particular piece of these units, they stand on a large tract of agricultural land, which, like I said, is located in close proximity to the SEZ. The landlord was a former employee at the IT park. And then he, realizing an immense business opportunity, thought that and saw that there was an increasing demand for rental housing in and around that area, particularly by the support staff that were employed in the offices in the SEZ. So then he invested in building these row units in a small portion of his agricultural land. Here again, at first, to cater to the demands, he built a set of 5 rental units. And then later on, realizing that the demand persisted, he built a bunch of units behind the original set of 5. So the ones that the particular structure in orange that you see is the landlord's house, and the 2 units in gray are the set of rental units. So while again, when we were interacting with this particular person, he was saying that when they built the first set of units, they didn't really have an intention to expand it. So that's why they went for this particular sort of construction, and also because this was the kind of construction that you see all around Coimbatore and also in other parts of city that usually caters to this particular tenant group. So, which is also the reason why they could not build on top of the first set of units, because it didn't have like a proper concrete roof, and the foundation was not strong enough to accommodate a second floor. So these are the kind of decisions that the landlords make at a particular time. Next slide. So one other thing that a major finding of our study is the owner-tenant relationship. So what we see is that the form is an imprint of the social relationship between the tenant and the owner. And it's often it's codified manifestation of certain codes of conduct that they share between themselves. So across both cities, we observed a clear trend that was the kind of relation that the tenant had with the owner and vice versa often, inform the design aspect of the house. For instance, this particular case, this was a unit that was built as a post-retirement plan for an elderly couple, which was again in close proximity to the Chill SEZ. So they built this in anticipation of the IT boom, and their who they thought would be their prospective tenants were the IT professionals who were working in those companies. But unfortunately for them, it failed to attract the kind of person, their targeted group, largely owing to lack of connectivity of that area and the lack of amenities in and around that area. But instead, the group that it attracted were again the support staff in these companies, which were largely the security guards and housekeeping staff and so on. So then when he realized that the particular house that he built is attracting a different sort of group than what he had initially planned, he then started making modifications to the design and also the way the entire rental arrangement. For instance, even though the units that you see on your left, they are 2 BHK units with water connections inside, he decided to not supply water inside the houses, and instead he had set up standpipes outside the compound. And in essence, essentially shutting off the supply to the water supply inside the house so that he can always keep an eye on the people, so that they don't also overconsume the water and electricity and whatnot. And again, when he realized that this was sort of the group that he was attracting, the units that he built later on were starkly different from the initial 2 BHK units that he built. So if you look at the image on the left, the ground floor is his house where the landlord is staying. And then if you notice just above that, he has started building units which are being let out. But interestingly, the entrance to this unit is not through his common. So the structure to the left of that, and the entrance is to the structure to the left of that, and he has built a passage between these two units. So the entrance to this house or the units here is from an entirely different compound adjacent to it. So his idea was that, or his rationale was that he didn't want to have any sort of contact, or he didn't want to come in close contact with his tenants who are largely right now the security staff in the SEZs. Again, the houses had from a 2 BHK, it went to what you typically see for worker housing, which is a large hall, which may or may not have a partition in between. The kind of worker housing that you see in Coimbatore in the earlier cases and also in other cities of India. Yeah.
So we see that when we examine the individual houses itself and the space occupied by the owner and the tenant, we also see that there is a certain sort of negotiation that's happening. In few of the cases, we see that the owner occupies a substantially larger area than the tenant. But there are few other cases where the tenant also dominates because of a certain relationship that grows over time. So we wanted to pull out certain instances and how the architecture of these houses were facilitating or emerging new relationship between the tenants. So because this house was occupied mostly by the bachelors, they were forced to add a parallel staircase, and this led to a very different relationship and ways of interaction between the neighbors. When this house owner finally decided to add a house above, they constructed an external staircase and created a new door to sort of not allow the new tenants to interfere, and which also starts hinting at a certain sense of privacy and boundary, which often gets lost when one tries to produce large scale affordable housing. And on the other hand, in the first example we were talking about, despite the split in the ownership of the place itself, because the house was built in the beginning earlier, the one staircase continues to exist and negotiates with the emerging new users and the people. So we wanted to share with you another set of findings, which are the stories of the form. And we see that the form itself is an imprint of the social relationships between the tenants and the owners. So the arrangement of the furniture inside the house pretty much codifies the aspirations of what the tenants see. And the rental housing that happens outside the house, in fact, actually affects also the configuration of the house itself. So in the first case, the room at the back was a part of this house itself. But when they decided to add some houses at the back, they sort of sealed that door and created new rental housing on this side and created a door. So the things that are happening on the outside also start informing the configuration of the house itself. And what more, the outside factors like the land also play a very important role in defining the typology that emerges. In Coimbatore, we saw in the case that Nihal was mentioning as well, that there is an abundance availability of land. And because of that, the new rental forms could start spreading across the area. Whereas in Bangalore, being the pre-established industrial area, the plots were sort of plotted out, and the availability of the land itself restricted what form you could build. So in this particular case, they built only on half of the land and kept the other half as is, so that they could sell and make some profit along with it. And this piece of the building, which was built only on the part of the land, had certain limitations because it couldn't scale up further and eventually participate not fully in the rental market itself. So we see that despite the modularity and the design of the underlying layout, because rental housing was produced by the individual owners, there are several expressions despite a strong framework. And we see that through the stories that a house was not made at once. It was not a vision of a single person, and it grew incrementally over time based on the economic and social considerations of very different people, not just the owner, several times the tenants itself.
So then it takes us back to the initial points that we made. So through our findings, through our research, what we realized was that a host of economic and social factors, which more often than not lies outside the purview of formal design, determines the production of housing. And to go back to what Vinita had said in the beginning of the presentation, as India is rapidly urbanizing, the provision of rental housing becomes a crucial component to address the affordable housing shortage that we are faced with. So in this regard, what our research intends to do is understand the production of rental housing so that we can inform the potential policy directions that the state, especially in the context where they are in the verge of formulating a rental housing policy, we are looking to, through our research, by understanding the production of rental housing, we are hoping to inform potential policy directions that the state can move towards so that they can facilitate this sort of organic residential rental housing market that is coming up in an attempt to address the affordable housing shortage. Thank you.
So we've now come to the end of the 3 sessions, and I hope we've still got some reserve of energy to quickly jump into a conversation with all of y'all. I would like to request all of you to unmute yourself. We do have received a couple of questions from the listeners, a few very specific ones and some across the panel itself. I would like to begin with asking you all questions that is common to everyone. I think though our presentations seem starkly different from each other, engaging with questions that are starkly different, there was something similar, and that was the spirit of figuring out the negotiation and what design could do. So at this moment, I would like to ask the panelists that when in the sort of negotiations that you were doing in your own context, in your own questions and journeys, where would you draw a line? How much is too much design? And how much do you think you should facilitate with the tools that you brought in and with the approaches that you carried and the hat that you wear? Sir, we would like to begin with you.
That's a very interesting question. How much is too much design? So you're always trying to sort of, there's this constant tension between architect and client. You are trying to sort of impose your ideas on them, and they are trying to sort of bring in what they require, sometimes impose their ideas on you, whatever. But I always believe that, there is a responsibility of the architect to be humble enough to understand the requirements of the client, especially lifestyles. Like you said, I mean, in one of the, probably the most important aspect of your presentation was how things grow organically. There are various factors that make or shape housing the way it is. And I think that is the case with any individual houses too, which is why when I started off, I said probably the 2 most important things that a designer needs to do is to see and to listen. But I think there are certain things you'll have to sort of prevent them from, doing. That is your responsibility. I mean, no ventilation in the house. Southwest corner, there cannot be any window because, my Vastu guy says, you have to protest. you have to protest because the southwest is where the wind comes in from in Coimbatore. So you'll have to protest. You'll have to make a, you'll have to make a stand, and you'll have to educate them. You'll have to win over them, and you'll have to, get them to, understand what it means. You can't force anything. You can't force anything. You can only get people to buy into your ideas through knowledge, logic to a certain extent. And, those are the only two methods of coercion to get them to do it. But yes, at some point in time, you'll have to draw a line. But your question I thought was a little different. It was when do you draw a line with design? I think there has to be a certain area which the client fills in and makes a house a home, wall surfaces. And I think no two houses can be different. It's like stitching a suit, right? I mean, it fits to one's body. So I think it's very important to understand that, and you'll have to draw a design. You can't sort of, dovetail. You have to dovetail your ideas with their aspirations and their lifestyle.
Keshav, would you like to add your thoughts on it? What were the sort of struggle or the tension that you faced when you had to say, this is logical, oh no, this is intuitive, and what were your thoughts?
So yeah, I mean, a house, according to me, is something that that successfully negotiates the interrelationships that happen between the different parts of house. So it's just, so yes, it's some. I can't draw a line between what is logical and what is not. That especially in my thesis where logic plays a very important role, it was very difficult for me to draw that line to say, yes, this is where my line stands. And yes, so in the purview of this thesis, yes, I said that understanding the traditional and trying to replicate those interrelationships that happen in successful habitats, to me, is what makes a house, and that's what I stood by. Yes.
Nihal, would you like to add some of your thoughts?
So yeah, so in our cases, what largely I can think of is the design aspect is not only influenced by what that particular landlord or the homeowner wants, but also, like I said in the presentation, the kind of relationship that they would like to have with their particular tenant. And the design aspect also plays a prominent role here, because that particular landlord or the homeowner is not designing a house for himself. He's designing a house for an entirely different group. And perhaps the group that like we have seen, the group that he designs the house for is not the group that eventually comes to him or her. So then it becomes a bit of a gray area. It becomes a bit tricky in this case. So
yeah, I think it also sort of reminds me of the conversation we were having at that house, where I think the excited architect in us, I was really enthusiastic to say, oh, where would you like, if you had an architect, what sort of suggestion would you take? Because we saw that they had resorted to very impromptu methods that they sort of saw around and mimicked. And they also didn't realize that probably 5 years down the line, if they'd want to add few more houses on the established ground floor of houses, it's not really possible because they've not established like a good foundation or so on. So for us who's already automatically in the field, will feel that there is a certain need for design. But I think constantly we sort of need to start reminding that it's always not about attaining a certain efficiency, attaining or meeting a very high level of utility, but rather what the situation demands. And talking about this, it quickly actually connects us to the next question, which we've received from Shalin Bhatt. He asks us, can we, because we've presented different perspectives, can we all see these three different set of design, research, and technology perspectives coming together and collaborate with each other to address incremental design solutions as a whole? And probably here, does the government or municipalities or design associations like individual practicing architects have any platform where designers, researchers, and collaborations can happen beyond just numbers and quantification? where and how do you see these sort of collaborations happen from the position you already hold?
Can I take the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think it's extremely important. I mean, one of the biggest sort of gripes that I have with architectural practice in India is absolute lack of research. There's nobody that's involved in research at all, and very, very few researchers work with practicing architects like us and give us. I mean, I was just thinking when you guys were making your presentations, when we make these really large, 40-acre, 50-acre housing complexes, if there were strategies and if there was research, if there are strategies that emanated from research, a lot of these would not have been unsold.
Yeah.
Or at least, I mean, there would have been I think research probably fine tunes design in such a way that it makes it much more appropriate, and technology pinpoints that, absolutely pinpoints. I just sent a message to Keshav saying as a tool to measure design is certainly absolutely interesting. I mean, his was a tool that sort of said, these are the unwanted corridors and all this. I mean, if we had sort of integrated research and technology, we would have a RERA Act today. We would have a RERA Act. We wouldn't have the government coming and telling us, you developers and, you guys are cheating us with your saleable areas. You wouldn't, because there is a tool to sort of measure it. There was a professor when I did my master's in the US that said that if you can't measure something, it's probably not true.
Yes.
And I think that's very, very important. And that's what both the technologists and the researchers bring. There ought to be a forum. There isn't one. Maybe, Geeta, this is the starting of something, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
And not just, I mean, you guys are in a particular area of this architectural research. There are researchers like, behavioral research. When I worked in the US, we worked a lot with people with dementia. And, especially we worked with a lot of psychologists and space research groups that gave us so many inputs, the fruitification of which was so satisfactory at the end of the whole thing. So I guess there ought to be, there isn't, that's the truth. There isn't research. We backward we backward engineer, reverse engineer everything. And I think there needs to be a lot of original research, and, it's time that all of us collaborate. And Corona has sort of, made us look at a few things differently. And I hope this is the beginning of something interesting.
Any of you would like to add?
I can, So essentially, because our research was entirely like as an observer and not like an architect going into field and trying to understand how we can sort of supplement for their lack of skill, but we were actually observing in a lack of skill, how do then people sort of, make up for it and build whatever it is that they need to, like, for them to be content with. But I do see the role of architects in terms of innovating and finding ways to actually make this form of auto construction, or like this form of construction, more accessible, more affordable, more technologically like sound, like, in terms of more resilient. Like, we had 2 cyclones recently, and all those who've auto constructed houses or the shacks that were by the beaches have been flattened, right? Like, so I see the role of architects and engineers coming in there in sort of standardizing in a way that it's accessible to people, resilient housing, and sort of building codes, and that is supported by technology and science, that'll actually sort of help bridging this gap, because there's a huge section of population that cannot afford architects, or cannot sort of have an architect come and build houses for them. But what we can do is sort of disseminate this knowledge, make sure that it is accessible, build codes, build sort of techniques that are more accessible for them, that they can sort of take in and sort of like imbibe it within their own forms of auto construction. So I see that way in which things can come together.
If I can sort of add to that, I think there's a big role for the government to play. And, I mean,
oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and also as, let's say an Indian Institute of Architects or an Indian Institute of Interior Designers, we probably are the most weakest, professional body that you can see. you take the lawyer's body or an auditor, we have absolutely no say in government. I think that's pretty sad, because built form, built environments is what makes a city. I mean, today your Dharavis and Coimbatores are a problem because of just that. And I think it is very important that we play a part in influencing government to do that. And I hope there is another Rusi Modi who can sort of a politician in us who can sort of represent us. I mean, it's pretty sad. You absolutely fall to deaf ears. There's a huge part for the government to play. Smart city projects or projects that are awarded to people. I don't know the basis in which they are awarded to people. There is no public hearing. Every country that I've worked in, or every country that I've sort of stayed in, has had you have a public forum, you have a user forum, you can actually come and comment on it. Where is it? And why haven't we made ourselves heard and more visible? I mean, it's also our failing that way.
Processes are not very participative, and processes could be more participative and more inclusive of civil society organizations such as like group of architects or interior designers who can actually sort of come in. And state housing shouldn't have to fail. State housing shouldn't have to be of a lower quality of construction. State housing shouldn't have to be rebuilt every year after every cyclone. If only like we could open the discussion to everybody else, have more inclusive planning participation, so that like the ones that we are building are resilient to actually stand the test of time. And that's where
Yeah, but I don't know, what comes to my mind is like, of course, we need to acknowledge the role of the state and everything, but just like how we see the rental scenario where we have figured out ourselves, the individual homeowners themselves are providing the housing and filling up this gap. I want to push back a little bit if we really need to say that, is the state opaque to certain group of professionals, or is it possible that we ourselves become more proactive? Like, it actually reminds me of this example of Sidewalks Lab in the United States. So what they do is they have actively used technology where they say that through the platform that they are developing in a project that is Seaside Toronto project. So they've created an interface where master planning, which we constantly associate with like a centralized action of the state, sort of decentralizes and involves public. And I think, as Vinita was mentioning, participatory and so on. I was just wondering if we, instead of having a sort of ghettoized version of who we are and not ready to move out of our seats, could probably expand, and probably here technology could really play a role, especially with COVID taking over and things becoming highly remote and remote day by day. It's very easy for us to architects to just sort of sit in our own desks and probably I see what Keshav was pointing out, technology could really be a way here where we reinvent our methods, figure out ways and create platforms where the research comes together and we go out proactive. Like, I don't know, that's something that, yeah.
I mean, one thing that I'd, if we still have time on this, and it's probably an important thing is architecture, urban design, housing, everything needs patronage. Okay, you can do the best possible designs on paper. You can probably have the best of ideas, but you need to get it built. Most public works abroad are done by architects, whereas most public works in India are done by the CPWD.
Mm.
The Central Vista is probably the first large architect. Whether you like it or not, it is an architectural project. How he got it, why he got it, these are all things I don't think we should talk about, but it's the beginning of something. And I think we should acknowledge this. Without patronage, I mean, we can sit down and cry ourselves hoarse. Nothing is going to happen. Somebody needs to build your ideas. You need research, you need technology, you need design. All three needs to combine, but it all needs to be implemented. And that's where the state comes in. It is important for associations. It is important for public bodies like this to force the state to process it the right way. I mean, look at Amaravati. Yes. I think all of us have heard about Amaravati's story. How the whole thing has gone. It's not built simply because the new CM believes that Amaravati should not be there. I mean, it's very important that and today is a world of Zoom and webinars and everything. So our reach is further. We can sort of, you can sort of galvanize a larger thing, and probably the internet is the most powerful galvanizing tool. It's the largest galvanizing tool. Look at what's happening to Floyd in the US, and look at how it's been galvanized simply through the internet.
Yeah.
I think it's time we start moving away from all this and start getting involved in a little more public work.
True. Yeah, I think I'm sort of, yeah.
I just want to say that when I said inclusive, I definitely meant architects and civil society groups, but I also would like to add that by participation, it also means including the public, the people who will actually be using it, and open up to discussion forums that will actually ask, like, how is it that you want to use this space, or like these buildings or this housing project. So I feel as architects and also as state should, probably the state cannot provide, but can definitely facilitate for all of these bodies to come together and sort of build something that is better than what we have at least.
Nihal, would you like to add something?
No,
Keshav?
not.
I mean, just posing a counter question. I mean, it's just like, don't you think it's just, I mean, just that the public is not involved in India. It's just that we have a large amount of public. I mean, is that so? I mean, I see that as the primary issue that's coming across in this. I mean, that's the only reason why I feel that so many projects are not going out in the public.
I don't quite agree, Keshav. You know that there are a bunch of flyover projects that's happening in Coimbatore.
Yeah, of course.
The government ever published the plan in a newspaper?
I mean, yeah, yeah.
130 kilometers of flyover at 14,500 crores from point A to point B.
Yeah.
How much more do we need? I mean, if this was in, let's say, the US, and I'm sure Naksha would, agree, it would have to, the drawings would have to be put in a public place. The public will have to come there. They will write suggestions. I still remember when we worked on the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, when I used to work in the US, we had to publish the plans. We had to put it up in the community center of the thing. And I still remember, I used to be the youngest guy there, so they made me stand there. And they would, some lady would come there and say, I don't think this is safe enough. That was the janitor. And you had the democracy. I mean, planners talk about democracy, and it's very important that is implemented.
Yes.
Has there a single flyover? We know about the flyovers in Coimbatore. And there are flyovers in Salem. If you miss one exit, you will end up in Bangalore. 140. Yeah. There's no way you will land anywhere else. So it's very important. I mean, that transparency is where we need to demand that transparency.
Yeah, and I think that would also come from a very decentralized sort of participatory process. So it need not always be at a state level or at a city level. It can also be at a ward level where a particular project is affecting a section, parts of the city. You can always have decentralized planning processes.
Yeah. I think that was an interesting set of things, and I think it was interesting, like how as soon as we thought of sort of integrating these different approaches, the question didn't become about who wins or who loses, but we started discussing what is the origin or what is the starting point. And I think through more such discussions, bringing in perspectives from different people who wear different hats, I would say, it would be interesting to continue this conversation. And we do have a few other questions received by the viewers, but then we would like to call it a day, since I would not like to take too much of the time from the panelists itself. I see this almost as a moment that has triggered very interesting set of questions that we can definitely take ahead in the choice, and like in bringing new speakers who could continue to raise these questions. I would like to thank all the panelists for taking out their time and presenting your work. It was indeed exciting. And I'd now like to ask Architect Geeta to conclude the session formally.
Yeah. From the aspiring client's requirements compressed into a tight site, to the aspirational emergent typologies in the housing and pushing the limits of technology as a tool to design, it is evident that all these three presentations bring in diverse perspectives. It is important to realize that each are very much contextualized in their own frame. And what I believe is important is not only to recognize these positions, but also further the design profession to make and propagate informed choices within a scope. So having these youngest professionals to present their work, I think we are now replenished with unbound enthusiasm and energy. After a successful presentation today, I believe all of us will be keenly looking forward for further such webinars from Coimbatore Center. So I hope everyone is safe and embracing the new normal with family and beyond. On behalf of IIID Coimbatore Center, I would like to thank everyone, all the panelists and all the viewers for participating and supporting this webinar. We are looking forward to you for the next webinar, and thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geeta.
We will close. We will close.
Okay, I think all of us need to leave the meeting individually.
Bye.
Thank you.